Hey YouTube, I'm Ross Stewart, Stewart Media Digital, and I'm here today to talk about the Sony 16 to 35 2.8 G Master lens. Now, if you watch my channel, you'll know I did a hands-on review where I took this lens out into the world and got some cool shots. But this is going to be my long-term review. I've had it for a couple years now, and I've taken maybe tens of thousands of shots with this lens. So I want to really get into the details of this lens, what I do and don't like about it. 16 to 35 is a very important focal range in my opinion. It is a member of the infamous holy trinity of lenses. And I agree with that for a lot of reasons. 16 to 35 is a great lens to have in your kit. It is really versatile. I've used it for all sorts of shots, events, weddings, commercial photography, landscape photography, even some portrait work. So now let's get into what I do and don't like about this lens. So first let's talk about build quality. This is a very nicely built lens, as you'd expect from a Sony G Master lens, but it is all plastic. But don't let that fool you. The plastic is still very sturdy feeling, and it really cuts down on the weight a lot. It's only about 1.5 pounds or 680 grams, and that makes it balance really nicely with Sony's full frame bodies. It is still front heavy, and on aps-c bodies like a 6500 or a 6600, it is still going to feel very bulky, but at this point that's sort of to be expected out of the larger professional grade zooms and a lot of the larger prime lenses as well. The zoom ring feels really nice. It zooms in and out very smoothly, but it still has enough resistance to where I'm not really worried about it getting knocked out of place. Where I do have a concern though is that it does telescope, with it being fully extended at 16 millimeters. This can definitely introduce moisture and dust into the lens. According to Sony though, this is moisture and dust resistant, and it does have a small rubber gasket on the back. The focus ring on the other hand is a bit too loose feeling in my opinion. It is focused by wire, so I could definitely see situations where I may miss focus if I were shooting manually, but the autofocus on the new cameras is so good, I don't ever really use manual focus. Even in video with the touchscreen on a lot of the cameras, it's getting so good that this isn't a huge concern for me. But if you do like to shoot manual focus in video or even stills, I could see this focus ring being an issue. Speaking of focus, it does have an autofocus manual focus switch. That is really nice. Some of the cheaper lenses do not have that, and then you have to go into the menu to do manual focus, and that can be really irritating in those situations. So it's nice to see it on here, but all of these higher end lenses have that. It has one focus lock button, which is also customizable. You can program it to be just about anything. I have never programmed mine to do anything. Some of the other lenses like the 70 to 200, that one has 3. Again, I don't really know how you would use all that, but if that is something you like, this one does have 1. Unlike some other high-end Sony lenses, this lens does not have a manual aperture ring, but it is a zoom lens, and you don't really see them on the zoom lenses. You mostly see them on the primes, so I'm not that disappointed, but I have grown to really like that manual aperture ring. Not everybody likes it, and I totally understand why. But I do like it, and I would like to see it on future iterations. The last thing I want to mention about the build itself is that for a wide angle, going all the way to 16 millimeters, thankfully this lens does not bulge out at all, so you can put standard filters on the front of this lens. You also don't have to worry quite as much about scratching the front element. Some ultra wide angles, the front element sticks out a little bit, and that always makes me really nervous about scratching it. So it's nice that this one is a little bit recessed. Now let's talk about image quality. At 35 millimeters, this lens is almost perfect. It is sharp corner to corner, there's no barrel distortion, there's very little vignetting. At 16 millimeters, it is still very sharp, but you do start to see a little bit of dullness around the edges. But it's really not bad at all, and even the dull parts are sharper than a lot of other lenses. At 16 millimeters, you also do start to see a good amount of barrel distortion, especially if you take close-up pictures. This lens has a great minimum focusing distance, so you can get some really trippy, cool shots at 16 millimeters when you get really close. It also has some vignetting at 16 millimeters. It is really easy to fix in post, but it definitely exists, especially at the wider focal lengths. Now, if you're using this lens on a aps-c body like the Sony a6000 series, a lot of these issues completely disappear because it crops out the edges. So the vignetting almost completely goes away, the barrel distortion. It still bulges in the middle a little bit, but it's way less noticeable, and the corner dullness completely gets cut out. So this is a great option for people who do use aps-c bodies that think they may upgrade to a full frame body at some point. It behaves like a 24 to 52.5 millimeter lens, which puts it at a nice sweet spot right in the middle. As an f2.8 lens, this lens has pretty impressive bokeh. It is definitely a lot harder to get nice bokeh on wide angle lenses like this, but it does have that minimum focusing distance of just under a foot or 0.28 meters. So you can get nice and close to your subjects, create a good amount of subject separation, and get some blurry backgrounds. It does have an 11 bladed aperture, so you get really nice round bokeh when you do manage to get it. A lot of people are going to use this as a landscape lens, and I think Sony really had that in mind. This has Sony's nano AR coating to cut down on flaring and ghosting, and it handles shooting towards the sun very well, especially when you get those beautiful sunset shots. Autofocus is another place where this lens really excels. In some ways, it's not a very fair comparison because you're not going to be in a lot of situations where you really have to make sure that a single eye is locked in on focus. But in every situation I've used it in, it has worked perfectly. I can't think of a situation where it's faltered or missed focus. It is, even at 2.8, even when I get close to subjects to try to get nice subject separation, it does a great job locking right on subject and tracking and keeping everything in focus. The biggest drawback of this lens is that it is quite expensive. It is $2,200 US, which makes it a pretty expensive investment. There are a couple other great options though. There is a Sony Zeiss f4 version of this lens that has optical stabilization for only about $1,350, making it almost $1,000 less expensive, and it's also a great option. It's sharp and it has that optical stabilization, so that is a very great alternative if you don't want to drop $2,200 on this. There's also a newer 24mm 1.4 prime lens, which 24mm is right in the middle between 16 and 35. So if you want something wide, but you don't necessarily need the flexibility to zoom in and out, that is a great option for only about $1,400. And with that, you get a couple more stops of low light and you can get even better blurry backgrounds with that 1.4 aperture. Now, if you're only shooting aps-c, like Sony's a6000 series, a great option for you might be the 16 to 55 2.8. It's about $1,300, but you do get an extended zoom range, 16 all the way to 55, which on aps-c will behave like 24 to 82.5. So you get that bigger zoom range while maintaining the 2.8 aperture at a lower price. All right, thanks so much for watching. Please be sure to like and subscribe. Thanks.